Producing a hit TV series like The Bear was once a path to serious riches for its cast and creators. But in another massive entertainment shift, developing groundbreaking shows is worth hundreds of millions less than it used to be. Here to discuss the new financial realities of the television industry is Forbes reporter Matt Craig. Matt, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Brittany.
I want to start off the conversation talking about the traditional TV syndication system. So let's go back to the days of Friends, where that group of friends was making $1 million per episode. Talk about how that worked and exactly how lucrative it was for both the show, the creators, and the cast.
Sure. So in those good old days, which really weren't that long ago, I mean, Friends were off the air 20 years ago, but I would say even up to maybe 10, 15 years ago, it was the case where studios who produced the shows and the TV networks that were distributing the shows were separate entities. And so the studio would produce the show, they would pay for it, that included the cost of production and also the fees for the talent. And then they would essentially like rent it out to different distribution networks. So that would start with a TV network who would pay to show the show. And it's important to say that most shows, didn't make money or barely broke even. But in the case of a Friends or like a huge breakout hit, this network would continue to order multiple seasons of a show, usually like 22 episodes or sometimes even more than that for a single season. So talent was being paid on a per episode basis, and they continue to be paid on a per episode basis, but there was many more episodes to go around. And then if the show continued to be successful and usually hit 100 episodes or whatever the threshold was, it would go into syndication. And what that meant was that then other entities would basically pay to rent out that show for reruns. So cable TV networks being the most famous example, but then also overseas markets and eventually streaming services. And if you think about it, if you're the studio that paid to produce that show, you have already paid for it. It's a done deal. It's in the bank, right? But every time you resell it, you're just making pure profit. So a very successful show could make hundreds of millions of dollars in profits. And during that time in Hollywood, talent had a lot more leverage in these negotiations. And so as seasons went on, you said, if you want me to come back for seasons 8, 9, and 10, you have to give me a little slice of the pie. In the case of Friends, the actors all collectively bargained for 2% of the show's profits each. And to this day, that is worth millions and millions of dollars. We estimated last year Jennifer Aniston brought home about $17.5 million just in residuals from Friends in the past year. So the money could be incredibly lucrative and significant for not just the showrunners who made the most amount of money and the producers, but also for the acting talent. So there was plenty of money to go around back then.
When you think about syndication back in the days of Friends, in the days of Seinfeld, you really think of $2 signs, right? I mean, it was just cash flow was everything.
Sure. Yeah. I think again, it's important to note that not a lot of shows are Friends or Seinfeld, but in the case of those absolute home runs, there was people who were making stupid amounts of money. I think a lot of the houses in the Hollywood Hills out here, for me, or bought from these shows. I mean, again, not even just Seinfeld and Friends, but if a show ran 7, 8, 9 seasons and got into syndication, it was going to make a lot of money for those involved.
So then we see this really seismic shift in the TV industry from the traditional model to what we were talking about to cord cutting and streaming. So talk about a pre and post streaming world and just how different they are.
Yeah, so I mean, I think especially like people our age were kind of the first generation to be hit with this, but it was really consumer choice over a number of years. Like I mean, I would even ask you like why did you start watching Netflix over cable? Right, one, it was cheaper. The cable bundle was $100-$200 a month, and Netflix came along. Initially, it was $8.99. Those were the good old days, but it was cheaper. And also at the time, all those studios were licensing their libraries to the streaming services like Netflix. And again, for the same reasons that they would make a quick buck. But by then, a lot of the networks and the companies that own networks had also bought studios. So that was maybe not the smartest thing at the time, because essentially consumers just got really, really used to watching things on streaming. And then the third factor is that these streaming services started paying huge amounts of money for original programming that was higher quality than what was on broadcast TV. I mean, broadcast shows were worried about profitability, and at that time, all Wall Street wanted to see from these streamers was subscriber growth. They could essentially borrow money into infinity when interest rates were incredibly low. And so over time, users, viewers flocked to these streaming services and kind of left the cable bundle behind, which it's continuing to decay to this day. So not only is the streaming services have a worse model, for all talent involved, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, but because everyone went over to the streaming services, also the broadcast model started printing less money for everyone. So basically, we've reached a point in 2024 where there's less money to go around overall, and everyone is bickering with each other and arguing over what's left of the reduced pie.
And to your point, I mean, shows like Friends and shows from 20 years ago, I mean, they were 20 episodes. Now there's less, like 8, 10, 12. They're more highly produced. They're like 8 or 10 smaller movies in one season. And you note in your piece for Forbes that developing successful shows is worth hundreds of millions of dollars less than it's used to be. So why are the earnings plummeting?
Sure. So I just talked about the massive move to streaming. And the thing to note here is that the streaming business is just a significantly worse business model, really for everyone involved, including the studios. But we'll start on the talent side. And the reason for that is that if you think about it, let's take Netflix, for example. The same company that would be the studio in the old model, so the company that pays for the show, is the same company that broadcasts the show. So they're serving as their own TV network. And the same company that would be the syndication, the cable. So the library of previous episodes is also available on that same company. So if you think about that, there's essentially no upside for a hit show. Whether a show is popular or not, there's no additional money to be made outside of just more people signing up for your streaming platform. So because of that, the platforms are disincentivized from ordering more and more episodes of a show. Instead, they're just going to have a kind of shots on goal approach, if you want to use a sports metaphor, and just order more and more and more shows. That's another difference between broadcast TV and streaming, right? On broadcast TV, you can only be showing one TV show at a time because it's a linear network, and on streaming it can be multiple shows. So basically, these streamers just started ordering tons and tons of different shows and not renewing most of them, and even hit shows weren't running multiple seasons because they get more expensive as they go along, and there was no added benefit of more revenue to be made. So basically, on the talent side, the economics became significantly worse because there was no profits to ask for. There was no profit participation because essentially there were no profits. And even if there were, it would be a slice of the subscriber revenue of Netflix, which it would be impossible to tie that to a single show. So in case of those massive home run type shows, there was way less money to be made, and because of that, the talent representatives got really angry and said, "Hey, we're making a hit show and we're not being compensated in the way we used to be."
So plug this example, this model for us in a real life show. I mean, one of the biggest it shows of the past few years has been The Bear with the star Jeremy Allen White. So how does this this earnings model look in The Bear?
Yeah, so the reason why I use The Bear as the example in my story is because you really couldn't ask for a show to do anything more in the modern landscape, right? It's critically adored. It's swept at the Emmys. It will sweep at the next Emmys as well. It's also a very popular show for Hulu, which is owned by Disney. So really, this is the show that if this show can't be compensated, then the model is broken, right? And that kind of is the case. I think these actors and these showrunners, Christopher Storer, the showrunner and creator of The Bear, are being paid pretty well, but not like they used to be. So essentially, because there's no profit participation to go around, the talent reps are left arguing for high fees. So in the case of Jeff, he won the Emmy for Best Actor for this role, so he got a massive raise between season 2 and season 3 of the show. But within season 3, he's making about $750,000 per episode. That's according to Forbes estimates, So that's even, we talk about the Friends example of $1 million an episode 20 years ago. So add 20 years of inflation. The talent today is still not being paid that. There's still, I would say, only a handful of talent that can fetch $1 million an episode today. And then on the creator side of things, again, you used to have the Dick Wolfs of the world and the Greg Berlantes and the Taylor Sheridans, kind of that older guard, making 50, 60, up to hundreds, in some cases more than $100 million per year, still to this day, because they're kind of grandfathered in from the old system. Christopher Storer, the person who created the bear, he has an overall deal with FX that Forbes estimated to be about $5 million per year. So it's 1/10 of what those old guard creators are making. And then instead of a profit participation model, there's a new sort of bonus model that's going around Hollywood, that's meant to replace some of that. It's just a fraction of what it used to be.
I want to keep talking about The Bear for just a moment because, as you said, The Bear really is one of the most successful shows this day and age. Before you and I started filming, I haven't watched The Bear, but I even knew the phrase "Yes, Chef" from the show. So does sweeping awards season transfer to financial success?
It doesn't, and the main reason for that is just that streaming has fewer episodes. So if you think about it, some of the talent reps that I talked to, they said, really, is The Bear a super profitable show for all its success? And the answer is probably not. But back in the olden days, I mentioned 100 episodes would be kind of the threshold for syndication. So even if syndication did exist today, The Bear, after its 3 seasons, will have 28 episodes. So barely, a quarter of the way to what the old syndication threshold would be. And again, there is no syndication for the show. I mean, it airs on Hulu the first time, and then it stays on Hulu in perpetuity. I think there was last year some movement on that front with Max starting to license shows to Netflix, and maybe that starts to look like syndication. But in general, basically, shows just end up where they start, and in some ways that's better for consumers, but in a lot of ways for talent, it means a lot less money to go around.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because how is this affecting the career trajectories of both showrunners and producers like the Dick Wolfs of the world, and the actors too, because you're not seeing Jennifer Aniston level money here. I mean, Jeremy Allen White probably is the biggest TV star, and he's only making not even $1 million. So is this giving more people of a slice of pie, albeit the pie is smaller?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think after the strikes of last year, and there's a major contraction going on in the TV industry right now. But before that, yes, there was way more shows being ordered. So a number of working actors was higher, the number of working writers was higher, and those sorts of things. Unfortunately, that too is coming down because coming out of the strikes of last year, there's fears of the recession, and all these companies now are having to worry about profitability because the interest rates are higher. And for that reason, less shows are being ordered, budgets are down. There's been layoffs at Paramount and other companies. And so, yeah, I would say that maybe was the case a couple years ago, and even that isn't the case today. But the thing I would say for the hit shows and the big talent like Jeremy Allen White, $750,000 an episode, 10 episodes, so $7.5 million. But no hope for any sort of significant residuals. The way that it was put to me by someone, which I think is just perfect, is that actors, and even creators too, need to be thinking about their career as kind of like a doctor or a lawyer instead of a prince or a king. You think about Dick Wolf. I wrote a story about Dick Wolf at the beginning of this year, that he's now a billionaire. That seems incredibly unlikely, if not impossible, today. And you might be thinking, $7.5 million is a lot for a doctor or a lawyer. I bet some of the lawyers I talked to for this story on background are probably making around that much. So it's still a very good living, of course, if you can make a hit show, if you can be kind of the it guy, you'll make a lot of money. Also, the thing I'll say, he's now very in demand for other projects, film projects in particular that can pay more. So I wouldn't, cry for Jeremy Allen White and his, $7.5 million. But it is not what it used to be. It is not going to be enough that he can kind of retire on it and continue to make millions and millions for the rest of his life.
Can you dive a little deeper here in the new compensation models? And will we ever see someone, a producer, make Dick Wolf level money again?
I mean, never say never. Who knows how the TV industry will turn. The one thing I'll say is like TV as a whole is not any less popular than it used to be. If anything, TV is more popular overall. It's just that it's more fragmented. So maybe if things consolidate and some of these companies buy each other, which seems pretty inevitable at this point, and there's maybe more of a monoculture. Yeah, I continue to believe that like hits and hit makers will continue to be paid at high level, and it really depends on just the competition and the kind of macroeconomics. But will we ever see it? Probably at some point in the near future. It seems incredibly unlikely.
And how does the audience play into here? Because I remember, like you said, when we were younger, there was appointment viewing. Friday at 8, there was a new movie, and everyone rushes home and turns it on. How has how the audience now consumes all this content changed everything?
Yeah, well, it certainly changed everything for broadcast TV. So if you think about, who continues to watch broadcast TV to this day, it's old folks. I mean, Nielsen just came out with a report, I think about a month ago, that said that prime time on the three biggest networks, average age was like 69 years old. So we're talking about a very specific subset of people. And because of that, advertisers have either left the platform or it's different brands, brands that would appeal to 69 and 70s and 80s year old folks. So there's less money to be made there for sure. On streaming, it doesn't necessarily matter in a subscription model, whether you're young or old, because your money comes in the same. There's been a kind of a rise of advertising in streaming, and at first, when I was reporting the story, I thought maybe that means that some of these shows will have upside again. But it turns out that digital advertising works completely different than TV advertising, and it's a little in the weeds. But because digital advertising can track exactly how many people view something, packages are kind of sold on a number of views basis instead of being advertised against a specific program. So even that isn't necessarily helping these shows become more profitable on their own. So I think the demographics matter in so much as we now know and can say pretty much without any doubt that streaming is the future, and eventually broadcast TV, at least in its current form, will continue to decay and then die out entirely. But it just matters a whole lot less for how these shows get paid out in the new landscape.
One of the biggest draws for streaming at the beginning was there was no commercial breaks. I'm old enough to remember when you first streamed for Hulu, you did not have to pay more for any type of commercials. Now that's not the case. We are seeing ads unless you want to pay top tier advertisement free subscription prices. So what do you think about the resurgence of commercials?
Yeah, what I really think it is it's kind of a classic story of economics, right? New people enter the market and they want to be disruptive, and the way they do that is by offering, benefits to viewers. So hey, at first it was you only had to pay $5, when Disney Plus first came out, or $8 when Netflix first came out, and there's no ads, and it's too good to be true, and so people move over. And then, as the pressures of needing to make money mount, suddenly TV starts to look a lot like old TV. And I think you're seeing that to this, to this point now with Hulu, with Amazon adding ads, with Netflix adding an ad tier. It's not their basic tier, but a lot of people are shifting over to that because it's cheaper. And so, yeah, we're seeing commercials come back. Like I said, we're seeing kind of a syndication type thing come back with Max, which is owned by Warner Brothers Discovery, licensing some of its shows to Netflix. That 5 years ago, that would have been unthinkable. But now that is kind of a syndication of a kind, if you think about it. Another thing we're seeing is Max and Disney, two separate companies, bundling their streaming services together into something that may end up looking like cable. And so it's basically like all these technology companies disrupted all the traditional entertainment companies and then want TV to go back to looking the way that it used to. And so I think we'll see more of that. The thing I will say is in streaming. One very smart analyst put it to me this way: like, commercials aren't used to make more money in streaming. They're just used to lower the price point, to offset the amount of money that a consumer would pay and reach more people. So maybe someone who wouldn't pay, 16 bucks or whatever the Netflix basic tier is now, might pay that $8, and we can make the money up from advertising. But essentially, it's not additional money to someone like Netflix or Amazon. And because of that, the upside is not really finding its way back to TV creators.
In your piece for Forbes, you quoted a talent lawyer who was laughing, saying that a pitch he heard from Amazon or Apple sounded a lot like a pre-streaming pitch from 10 years ago. So what do you think the implications here are for both compensation as well as production if we keep this status quo?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us viewers, it's new TV is going to look like old TV. Whether that is buying a bundle or seeing commercials or seeing, stuff from other companies licensed onto other streaming services, which is, like I said, the syndication thing. For viewers, it might look a lot like old TV. The question is, and talent representatives are very concerned that this is not the case, is whether the talent pay will return to what it was for old TV. They're very skeptical, and I would say after doing the reporting, I'm very skeptical as well that talent will continue or will start to rise back up to what it used to be 10, 15, 20 years ago. Not to say it never, will be, or that the model won't fix itself, but in the short term, it's hard to see a lot of upside for people that create shows, people who produce shows, write on shows, or star on shows.
Matt Craig, per usual, thanks for the conversation and your reporting.
Thanks, Brittany. Appreciate it.